Welcome back. It's the Flow Sports Hour on Flow FM. My next guest, Ken Piesse, is the envy of all sports lovers, myself included, as he's lived a life of attending grand finals and test matches and rubbing shoulders with Aussie and worldwide sporting royalty while being a first-hand witness to countless iconic sporting moments. He's detailed some of these great experiences in his new book, Living the Dream, and it's great to have him on the show with us right now. Ken, great to speak with you. How are you today?
Oh, going fine, Dan. Thank you so much. That really was a lovely intro. Yeah, I've been so lucky over the years. I wasn't quite good enough to play league footy here in Melbourne or test cricket all around Australia, but being able, the next best thing, no doubt about that, is, as you say, go to all those grand finals, cover test cricket all around the world. It's been just one heck of a ride for me. So I've just loved every moment. As you know, Dan, when we've talked previously, I've written lots and lots of books, including many ghostwritten for many of the footy stars, Dermot and Dipper and Dunstall and Paul Salmon and so on, and Tony Lockett. But really, being able to write about yourself and put in some of those favourite stories about writing those books, it leads to a bit of footy secret history as well as cricket secret history. It's been just a lot of fun.
Well, sports fans like myself love a bit of sporting history, and secret history is even better, those stories that don't quite make it out to the general public until years or even decades later. Ken, you've written, I think Living the Dream is your 87th or 88th book I read. Is that inclusive of all the books you've ghostwritten?
Yeah. So I think I'm probably up to around about in the 60s with cricket, 20 with footy. But yeah, the footy ones all include the books with where I have co-written with a Tony Lockett or a Tony Liberatore. Lockett, such a fabulous character, and it's funny, you see the kids kicking for goal now and they're kicking across their body and so on. You can imagine Tony's a dairy farmer up in Barrel in where Don Bradman comes from in New South Wales in the Central Highlands, Southern Highlands there, and you can just see him grimacing now. Why don't you just run straight at your target and kick it beautifully like he used to? And I think his percentage at set shots was 70%, 7 out of 10. And that's the best ever. So you would think sometimes the kids would just look back on these replays and think, well, maybe Lockett had it right. Maybe I should be doing this rather than doing all the fancy stuff. And I realise footy's moved on in so many areas. But yeah, being able, for me as a writer, to help the likes of Lockett and Dermot Brereton, like they're fabulous footballers, but they don't always have time to write their stories. So that way you get really close to them and you're really buddies for life, mates for life, which is lovely.
Fantastic stuff. I'm in total agreement there. There's too much kicking around the body and dribble kicks these days. And Jason Dunstall, you hear him on Bounce and various other Fox Footy programming. He's not happy about it. And many of the old full forwards who kicked, 800, 900, 1,000 plus goals clearly aren't very happy about it either. And they should be the ones the young players should probably be following. Ken, just for any of our listeners who may not be familiar with you and your previous work, perhaps you could just give us some more details about where your career all began and how you got to live the extraordinary life that you've lived.
Well, basically, I've been a journalist for 35 years and then a freelance writer for the next 25 years. So it's been a terrific journey. I joined The Age as just a general reporter. Apparently there were meant to be, Dan, 400 people going for the job cadetships this particular year, 1972-73. And I said to my dad, at the time, the Melbourne Age was probably the iconic paper in the country. It had the best journalists, and Graham Perkin, maybe the best Australian journalist it's ever been, was the editor-in-chief. And I said to Dad, what do I say to Mr. Perkin, Dad? And he said, just look him in the eye, smile, and give him the best Teddy Whitten handshake you possibly can. Teddy Whitten, of course, being an icon of the time, 60s and 70s. And so I was able to get the job. Graham knew that I liked sport, and I was able to write sport pretty quickly for The Age. And that just led me to a lifetime of writing cricket and football. And these days we take tours around the world. And I'm lucky enough to work for P&O as a sports presenter, telling some of those entertaining stories about some of the stars. So Yeah, it's sometimes you've got to pinch yourself. But it's been a lot of hard work, mind you, Dan, to get here. But I'm still writing, and I think this Living the Dream, my autobiography, I think people will really, really love it. It's a lot of me personally, me obviously, but there's a heap of anecdotes about all those stars from yesteryear.
Now, you've been able to tell a lot of extraordinary stories of a lot of other people and write a lot of fantastic books. How would you say Living the Dream ranks amongst all the books that you've written? It's probably hard to compare when you've written as many as you have, but being autobiographical and being able to look back through your own journey and all your own experiences, does that set this one apart from the rest a little bit?
Yeah, it sure does. My publisher, this time last year, I did a biography of David Warner. Now, Warner, fantastic cricketer, not everybody's cup of tea for some of the off-field shenanigans and the way that he does conduct himself. So I must say he's sort of lived two lives, Davey Warner. One before meeting his wife, Candice, now mother of his three kids, to the wild man that we had Warner previously. But every time I talk to, and I suppose it's one of the strengths of my work in that I try and talk to as many people as I possibly can about a subject matter. And I talked to all of Warner's mates, and they said he's the ultimate team man. Okay, the stuff that happened in Cape Town with the sandpaper cheating, it wasn't the best look for the game. It was a shocking look. But he said, Dominic Thornley, one of his former captains, said, but he was the only one brave enough to actually do it. He thought that Australia needed a big left to be able to win the game, needed Mitchell Starc to swing the ball around corners, and he was the only one brave enough, daring enough to do it. Now, it was a silly thing to do. It was a shocking thing to do. It brought Australian cricket to its knees. And the book became not necessarily a bestseller, but it did go into reprint. And my publisher, Michael Wilkinson, said to me, gee, you've been writing cricket for a long time now. How long is it? I said, well, actually, I played my first game 60 years ago. I've had 60 years in cricket and footy. Wow, he said, you've got to write your story, your autobiography. So that's how it actually all came about. But by talking about some of the famous players, like a Lockett, for example, one of my favourites, he got a 7-match suspension for actually elbowing Bluey McKenna and then throwing him into the animal enclosure at Moorabbin one day. That wasn't the best look. And Big Tony, no one could fire up. No one was as volatile. Maybe Wayne Carey was pretty close, but Big Tony was right there. And Doc Baldock was his coach at St Kilda, Mr Magic, one of the greatest post-war footballers of them all. And he said to Tony he was really worried about 7 weeks off, losing the match fitness, and literally Tony was one who would stack it around the midsection like he'd drink beer and eat pies and all that sort of stuff. He wasn't as disciplined as some. Fabulous footballer, of course. And Doc said, well, you've got greyhounds down there, haven't you, Tony, down at the Devon Meadows? Why don't you get your best greyhound, give him an extra K's walk in the morning and an extra K's walk in the afternoon, and everything will be fine. The dog will be happy, you'll be fitter and firing. And so next Tuesday, in those days, they only trained Tuesday, Thursday, played Saturdays. By the following Tuesday, Big Plugger was already showing signs of excesses, let's say. And Doc said, what have you been doing, Tony? Haven't you been walking that greyhound? And he said, sure have, Doc. He said, I just put him on the little walking machine, press the button, and away it goes.
Wow. Ken, you've got 60 years in footy and cricket. I've got 30 years on this earth, which means I wasn't around for the era where some of the stories that you're telling were even possible. They just don't happen anymore, especially Plugger throwing someone into the into the animal enclosure. It just doesn't happen like that anymore. That's why some of these stories are just so fascinating to me and the younger generation, as well as people from your generation and the generations in between us that did get to sort of live through the time when these stories were happening. And amongst all the fascinating stories you've outlined in this book, is there a favourite memory that you've got?
Well, I love Brian Roberts, the whale. Now, it is, again, from yesteryear, Richmond are playing Glenelg in the Australian Championship final. I was talking with Graham Corns about that, and he said, this was actually, I was in that game. And Glenelg are leading at half-time pretty easily, and big Brian Roberts, 6'7", 17 stone, huge man, great character, played for WA, played in South Australia, and he almost won a Brownlow as well in Melbourne. This particular day, Richmond have won the 73 flag, did it really well, and they're playing off in what used to be the Australian Championship final. They don't play it now, of course, these days. But Glenelg really going well, well on top, and at halftime, Whale Roberts, Brian, the great character of football at the time, he has not had a touch, hasn't had a kick, and he, instead of going in and getting roared at by Tommy Hafey, the coach, he goes directly into the medical room and he said, Doc, you got to give me something, Doc. I'm not getting a kick here. Tommy's going to hate me. He's not going to talk to me ever again. Doc, I don't care if it's illegal. You got to give me something. And so 20 minutes later, the boys are running out again after half time, and Doc calls him over and says, and he had 3 red tablets, he said, and a half a glass of water. Whale, now this hasn't happened. Don't tell anyone about it. Put them just straight down there. Don't crunch them, whatever you do. Don't crunch these tablets. And so the Whale quickly had these, and he went out there, and he had the best half of football he's ever had in his life. He's marking that ball. He's getting knockouts. He even kicked a goal. He's absolutely had the golden hour. And, of course, Richmond ran over the top of Corns' Glenelg and Knuckles Curley and all this. And he's gone, instead of joining the players in the rooms, he went straight in the medical room and gave the Doc a biggest bear hug of all time. You won't tell anybody, Whale, will you? No, Doc, but thanks so much, mate. Thank you so much. The Doc didn't have the heart to tell him that those 3 red tablets, red Smarties.
The old placebo effect. How about that? Remarkable stuff. Ken, is there a favourite interaction you've had with a sporting star, or perhaps even a least favourite interaction, depending on whether the more positive or the more negative ones have stuck with you more throughout the years and the decades?
Well, I got David Hooks caught on the boundary at the MCG one day bowling big leg breaks, but at the time the Shane Warne grandstand had been torn down and was about to be rebuilt as the Great Southern Grandstand, and there was a howling wind, and I was bowling loopy leg breaks with the howling wind, and Hooks had already hit me for a couple of sixes, as he liked to do. You're easy, Master, you're easy. He went for a third one, and he holed out to long on. So I liked that. There was another day there where I bowled, again, loopy leg breaks to Steve Waugh, fresh into the test team, and it was like a tennis match. It was amazing, Dan. 6-4, 6-4, 6-6. 32 runs off, 1 over. But one day, again at the MCG, bowling against Bob Hawke, the Prime Minister, who loved his cricket, was actually, I think he might have been 12th man at Lord's in an Oxford versus Cambridge game one day. I actually caught him out. And so Bob Hawke came off the ground, and he always had the last word, and he said, first time I've been called out by a journalist in 25 years, he said.
Yeah. I'm sure there were more opportunities for him to be caught out, but the other journos clearly weren't on top of it. Ken, what about, there was one interaction that you've outlined in your book that really stuck out to me. The time you saw Mark Jacko Jackson in a restaurant and went and said g'day, and he sort of said, were you on my list? Now, were you on his famous list?
Yeah, so for those that don't remember Jacko, he was the Energizer man. He had this little squeaky voice and spoke like that. And one day he was playing in a game for, might have been for Richmond back then. He made a name at Melbourne, also played at St Kilda. A free kick didn't go against him, and the Aboriginal umpire, Glenn James, was maybe the star umpire of the time. And Jacko had a go at him. You know, that was a bloody free kick. Bloody free kick. I'm going to come and burn down your bloody house, he said. And Glenn James, who had a great sense of humour, said, you can't. It's made of corrugated iron, he said.
Oh.
So this restaurant day was funny. Like Jacko had been doing a sporty sort of night, and he had a blue Hawaiian shirt on, and I'm looking at him across the room, and he's looking at me. And then I went across and, as you said, did say good day. And he said, Ken Piesse, I knew it was you. I didn't know if you were on my hit list or not, he said. And, but we ended up being pretty good mates. Susan and I went and visited him at his place in North Ringwood. And he was a pretty honest guy, Jacko, but he had limitations as a footballer. He could mark the ball and he was strong, but he did handstands as well. And in the end, Tony Jewell at St Kilda sacked him because he wasn't being a good enough team man. But, he became a rock and roll star. He did so many amazing things. So I'm hoping that he's going pretty well now. Life after football. Sometimes for the star players, like we've seen with the Wayne Carey, it can be pretty unkind. But Jacko, deep down, is a pretty fair, decent sort of bloke. So, yeah, he's one of the many that I've been lucky enough to come across. He definitely wasn't a mentor. Others have mentored me far better than Jacko, but it's been one of the great experiences to, have dealings with people like Wayne Carey and also Mark Jackson.
Well, he's one of the all-time great personalities, Jacko, and if anyone hasn't seen his interview with Mike Sheehan on Open Mic, that is well worth the 40 minutes or however long it goes for on YouTube. It is a stunning watch. From what I've read, you've basically made a career out of being a diehard sports fanatic. How do you feel, Ken, seeing the modern era of sports fans now where there's so many more opportunities for podcasters and bloggers to make their voices heard and to try and kickstart their own career, basically doing what you've done for the last 60 years?
Yeah, back then you got into journalism and really it was just writing that you had. But yes, the whole fields have opened up so much, and the best journalists, they're also on radio, they're also on TV, and good luck to them. Mike Sheehan, I worked with him, and he's maybe the best football writer that's ever been, and he was one of the first to branch into radio and TV, so he is a real trailblazer. But to see Mike had this amazing black book, and he worked at it. He'd ring fellas and just ask how they were. And he would write with a smile on his face. And it's the same, Dan, as you and I, like when you interact with a terrific radio presence. Years ago, I heard Ernie Sigley, best known in Melbourne as a TV and radio man. He did this interview with the rock and roller John Fogerty from Creedence Clearwater, and it was the best interview I've ever heard. He just listened and he bounced off what Fogerty had to say. And I congratulated Ernie years later. He says, I remember that interview, and he said, young Ken, it was easy, because I knew his story backwards, and so I just listened and just went with the flow. And no doubt it's the key to good interviewing when you know your subject backwards. And years ago, Dennis Lilly, maybe the greatest fast bowler that there's ever been, certainly of our lifetimes, he was doing his fourth autobiography in 6 years. Didn't particularly like the media, but I was one that he always would talk to. And so I did a lovely 6 or 7 minutes doing the Sigley way, bouncing off, listening, bouncing off what he had to say. And he came out with a big grin on his face, and he shook my hand really warmly as if I was his a brother, a long-lost brother. He said, I really enjoyed that, Ken. Thank you so much. And he was being really genuine. So when you get that sort of repartee and you get that sort of response from some of the great stars of the sporting world, you can't help but be pretty happy about it.
And as someone who has made a career out of being a diehard sports fan, a lot of people, I would dare say, in your age bracket yearn for the olden days and there's a lot of complaining that the game has changed and it's unrecognisable, whether that's about cricket or footy or whatever it may be. A lot of people yearn for the product that they watched when they were younger. As someone as fanatic as yourself, do you still love watching footy and cricket and the new modern athletes?
Oh, yeah. And while my book is all about nostalgia, like I love T20 cricket, didn't particularly warm to it earlier, but now just with the terrific skills, and on Friday night I'm going to go and see my Hawthorn play Fortis Grey, the Western Bulldogs at the MCG. I think there'll be about 90,000 in. It's going to be such a great spectacle. A bit of a pity because those two sides, if you like, are maybe the two informed sides in the AFL right now. So one of them has to lose. But to see the skill and the way they run. We had from my old footy club, junior footy club at Beaumaris, Lee Matthews was our guest speaker, and he said, gee, Essendon, think of the best side from yesteryear. Okay, in my case it was Essendon, and might have been the year 2000, and they lost only one game all year and won the grand final easily by 10 goals. And he said, if you put them in a time capsule and run them out on Friday night in the final against Hawthorn or Footscray or the Sydney Swans or Port Adelaide, he says they'd get beaten by 10 goals. The game is just so much better now. The athletes, the running, the sharing. Now, the goal kicking might necessarily be as good. That's about the only aspect. So it's exciting to see, especially at night. One of my must-sees I want to see Port Adelaide on a Friday night with Never Tear Us Apart. I want to be right in the crowd with my scarf swaying just before the siren. So, yeah, like you, Dan, I'm an absolute enthusiast, and I've been lucky enough to get up close and personal with so many of the stars of yesteryear, and hopefully may it long continue.
Well, Ken, I can tell you I've been to a lot of Port Adelaide games at Adelaide Oval, and the pre-game Never Tear Us Apart. It's the best pre-game, best match day experience in the AFL, but I'm a Sydney Swans fan, and I didn't enjoy it 6 to 8 weeks ago when they won by about 30 goals and absolutely flogged them, but that is a story for another day. Ken, we'll leave things there. It's been fantastic chatting to you. I've loved hearing all of your stories, and I've loved reading about them in Living the Dream as well. And the book is out now. I assume it's available at most good bookshops or all good bookshops?
Oh, yeah. Dimick's and Dillon's have got a lot of copies there in Norwood. Or if people would like a limited edition hardback signed by me, they can just go to my website, cricketbooks.com.au. But I always love chatting to you, Dan. You might be 30, I tell you what, but you certainly know a lot about the game, and your passion is shining through. So thanks again for the opportunity.
Thanks very much, Ken. Hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
All the very best. Cheers, Dan.